Howdy folks, we're looking at Edge Magazine issue 25, released in, let's see, can I make it from here? October 1995, and as always, discussing the future of interactive entertainment. And if you look closely, you'll see some pretty CGI graphics on the cover, but it took me quite a while to actually figure out what's going on here. We have somebody flying. Not a very attractive cover if you ask me, and this is the so manyth in the last couple months. This issue is about getting a career in the industry, and we'll see what Edge has to say about that. So the inside column is about what to do, and they say that there's not enough talent going around, but still companies are asking for experience and the like. There's no recognized college courses to help either at the time. Now they have them, but I don't know if they really help that much. So we'll see what else we have in this magazine. Another vague image, High Flyers. Well, we'll see what that's about. And some future games. It seems like I haven't prepared well, but I read this yesterday and I've already forgotten so much. So let's see what we have here. Oh yes, Lockheed Martin working together with Sega in order to create excellent 3D graphics. I don't know if that was ever incorporated. They're working for the Saturn II apparently. I guess that would be the Dreamcast, but I should look that up. See if Lockheed Martin had anything to do with the development of the Dreamcast. So already talk about the Model 3, even though the Model 2 at the moment is very popular, at least in late 1995. Sega would also be releasing games for the PC. I remember playing Virtual Fighter on the PC in the late 90s. So the Ultra 64 finally makes its way to developers, and rumor has it that the new joypad for Nintendo 64 will have this stick for analog input. Ooh, so the big secret that Nintendo had been trying to keep for themselves is revealed, and Sony would jump on that, and before you knew it, Sony had their own DualShock released. I think it was late 1998. Okay, maybe it took 2 years longer, but still, Sony didn't wait with their own, and the DualShock joypad has become more or less the standard joypad of the industry. Yeah, Virtual Boy being released, but not a really big happening. No, that was to be expected. There's even a Virtual Boy magazine. I'd love to see that. So Live 1995 is some conference, and I believe it was in England. Same thing with Develop, another conference. To get into the business, you should go there, meet all the pros. And that was a hit last year apparently, so they did it again. Here's a book about IBM, once the biggest computer company in the world, now being sidelined by all the other companies. And so that could be an interesting read, called Big Blues. So the letter section. Let's see. Somebody's talking about, hey, you know, the M2 looks all great, but how will that translate to gameplay? Another person saying, hey, you know, all the games are pretty much the same. What about games like Returned Fire that are different? Rather cynical letter saying that all the genres are the same. Somebody saying the Macintosh should get more coverage in the magazine, but Edge says there are not enough games. And somebody else asking, if I recall correctly, no, yeah, it was something about how powerful the PlayStation was at doing 3D. So yeah, Batman in the theaters. Okay, on to the previews. Killing Time. This was a interesting game for the 3DO. Actually, one of the better ones. Another fairly good 3DO game that didn't get much attention. And it's a shoot 'em up, like Doom, but with horror elements and puzzle elements. So I guess that was a smarter version for the corridor shooter genre. Didn't have very good graphics, but it seemed to work and it had good reviews. Assault Rigs for the PlayStation by Psygnosis. This game didn't get very good reviews, unlike the other Psygnosis games released at the time, like Wipeout. And it looks like a game like Cyber Sled, where you ride around and shoot each other in all kinds of carts. The D. This was an interesting game, also for the 3DO. Kind of like Seventh Guest, but with a much better story. And yeah, it's a horror game, much scarier too. And at the time, it was probably the best horror game for video games. There was a sequel which was planned for the M2. So yeah, made by the Japanese. Shining Wisdom was to come for the Saturn, and it didn't improve much on the other Shining games for the Mega Drive. Reviewers ultimately said this could have been a Mega Drive game. It's the rather standard go around and slash things adventure. Not as good as Zelda, even though it was obviously inspired by it. Darkstalkers being shown for the PlayStation. I don't know if the Darkstalkers game was as good as the Saturn version. I had the third Darkstalkers game for the PlayStation. I thought it was fine. But at the time, it wasn't that critical of fighting games. I mean, I thought the Street Fighter Alpha 3 version of PlayStation was fine until I actually tried out the Saturn and Dreamcast versions. So, yeah, Darkstalkers, a colorful fighting game featuring all kinds of horror tropes. A lot of fun. And a bit more action-packed than most Street Fighter games. But not that much new added to the formula except the colorful characters. So, V-Tennis for the PlayStation. Apparently this was made by the people who made Super Tennis for the Super Nintendo, although I could be wrong. But I've never heard of this anymore. It wasn't until Virtual Tennis with Dreamcast that tennis games became a thing again. Final Arch, apparently some kind of baseball game for the arcade and the Saturn. Hang On GP. Now we're going to see a lot of racing games made by Sega. I think there are 4 of them competing with each other using the Model 2 hardware. So we had Hang On GP 95, which was going to be released for the Saturn, which yes, looked quite like Daytona. And then we had Sega Rally. This one was as good as Daytona in popularity. That would also be making its way to the Saturn, and the preview mentions how Sega has gotten better at programming for the Saturn, so it should be close to the arcade. Now the PlayStation would later have Rave Racer, which was actually the true sequel to Ridge Racer because it had extra cars and extra courses. Unlike Ridge Racer 2, Ridge Racer 2 didn't add that much, but this one did. And I don't think it was that big of a hit for the PlayStation 1 because, yeah, it's, you know, people mostly got their fix with the original Ridge Racer. But this one was looking promising. So here's Indy 500, the third Saturn racing game using the Model 2 technology I just mentioned. Now this is only the arcade version, and Edge isn't that impressed, to be honest. So yeah, it hasn't been remembered well. I don't think it even made it to the Saturn. And of course there's Daytona USA, which was also still popular at the time. So Sega had 4 racing games that looked alike in the arcades. There was also Virtual Cop 2, a prettier version of the original Virtual Cop using the texture mapping, of course. And ooh, you can shoot at barrels apparently to take out enemies. I guess that's new. I've never been into shooting games like this on rails, so yeah. This is an odd advertisement. Game is kind of like GameStop, and I guess they're looking for managers. So why is this? What's up with the picture? Okay, so now we have Scavenger. This is a company in Los Angeles who were mostly concerned with making excellent graphics and demos for that, and I guess that's how they made their money. They went bankrupt in 1988, so they didn't last long, and most of the games you see here weren't released. This first one, what's the name again? Into the Shadows. I don't think that was released. It looks quite atmospheric, even though this sprite looks a lot like this sprite, so I don't think it was that well done when it comes to 3D. We see more pictures of Into the Darkness. We see here Amok. I think that one was released, but didn't get good reviews. One of them, I believe it was Amok, was used as a demo to show the 3D powers of the Saturn. But that could have also been Vertigo. Geez, I did all this research yesterday. I'm forgetting all the names. Well, it's not a big deal. Nothing to really remember. So these games either weren't released or have been forgotten for not being interesting. That's the way the industry was, so concerned with graphics. And yeah, there was a lot of new things to learn. So yeah, speaking of the bad-looking covers recently, we had this one, and this one, and this one. And of course the cover we now saw. And the next month we'll also have a pretty dreary cover. I mean, this is a fantastic cover, right? And Live 95 again. Get your Edge subscription. And here's the article about getting a job in industry. Now, I remember seeing this comic in the newspaper a long time ago. And yeah, these parents are thinking, oh, my kid plays the Nintendo all day. But good news, by 2005, yeah, the advertisements are going like, looking for good Mario Brothers player, $100,000 plus your own car. Can you save the princess? We need skilled men and women. So yeah, as if that would be the case. So what's interesting is that this article has a very British perspective, and they have 4 case studies of people who made it in the industry, and I believe they all had British backgrounds. And this one, this guy is the least one like the rest because he won a games arcade championship of sorts, and then he became a journalist, and then he started making his own magazine. So I don't think he actually worked on games. But this fellow, he started with the Sinclair ZX81, which was the black and white version of the Sinclair Spectrum. And we have Dave Perry, who also worked using the ZX81, a very British computer. And this fellow probably also used it, but he used an Amiga 500 to become good at graphics, and that's how he got his way into the industry, becoming very good at doing graphics on an Amiga. So in England, a lot of people had the Spectrum and the Commodore 64, which you could program your own games with. It was common to buy a magazine and copy the code hand by hand. And that's what this fellow did with Star Trek too. You would copy the code, and if you were smart, you would see how the code kind of worked. In the game, you can change things. So you had basically the raw skeleton of the game. And this fellow mentions how his Spectrum version of Star Trek was all buggy, and he had to fix the bugs himself. But within 2 weeks, he figured out most of the fundamentals of how programming works, because he had a game that didn't work very well, and he was basically challenged to fix that. So that's something most Americans don't have. Now, America's doing fine these days when it comes to making games, but in the mid-90s, I think England was doing better than America, actually. Probably because of people coding at home as children. So the rest of this article is mostly about being enthusiastic. You know, you have to be the one who wants it the most. And so that was the mid-90s. I don't know what it's like these days. If you want to get into industry, I still believe it's important that you know how to code and that you have experience with a lot of different tools. But I don't think using a Spectrum and a Commodore 64 is going to get you a job anymore. You're going to need a lot more. And these are also pretty interesting. The recruitment agency's view saying what you should do. I'll just zoom in so you could read them for yourself if you're interested. So we have, again, a commercial for The Head on MTV. I love that. Oh, we're already at the review section. We'll leave it at this, and next time we'll finish the magazine, Edge Magazine issue 25.